Are there other powers in heaven besides the God whom we know in Jesus Christ? To us, the answer's a no-brainer. Of course not. But it wasn't always so obvious. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. And this is your daily devotional for Wednesday, May 7th, 2025. To us, living so many centuries after the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, it seems second nature to regard him as Lord of all and the only God of all. But in the early church, people like Paul had to persuade new Christians that there was no other Lord in heaven besides him. It was not always an easy sell, but the result of his efforts to persuade forms the bulk of what we know as the New Testament. Yesterday, we saw part of the challenge facing Paul, the marketplace, or flea market as I call it, of religious and philosophical schools competing for the attention and allegiance of everyone in society, including members of the Christian churches. One of Paul's strategies was evidently to annex or adopt some of the language and ideas of these religious and philosophical schools and then reinterpret them through the lens of the gospel. In today's reading from Colossians, Paul changes gear somewhat and seems to use the words to a now forgotten hymn to talk about the cosmic Christ. Most translations of the Bible render this section as simply a section of prose, a paragraph. But in the Jerusalem Bible, a venerable translation, it actually does render it as a piece of poetry. And while the language will seem familiar, try to hear it against the background of a church where people really did believe in a variety of heavenly powers. Paul writes, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross." With a passage like this, it's actually helpful to know what it answers. And in this case, it answers the question of who's in charge. This hymn addresses the idea that was simply part of the common understanding of how the world worked, that there were various gods and demigods populating the heavens, at least in the popular imagination. Many people, even in the early church, saw little to no conflict between Christian faith and belief in other higher powers. We've also seen this idea in the Old Testament, where there was a widespread belief that there were many gods. The commandment about having no other gods before Yahweh was a command not to worship those other gods, but not a denial of the existence of other gods. What this hymn does then is similar to the commandment to Israel about having no other gods. It asserts the absolute primacy of Jesus Christ over all other powers, to the extent that there are other powers in the heavens. Image of the invisible God, firstborn of all creation. All things were created through him, firstborn of the dead. All of these statements serve to establish and underline the exclusive claim of Jesus Christ on the lives of believers. If this sounds a little obvious to us, just consider this. There are plenty of Christian people, even today, who would have no problem saying these words, or the words of the creeds, or any other affirmations of the Lordship of Jesus Christ, and yet who believe in astrology, which is nothing more than the idea that our lives and our destinies are influenced, if not outright controlled, by the positions of the stars and planets in the skies. And what is that if not a modern version of the ancient system of belief in different and really incompatible systems of belief. For Paul and for the leaders of the early church, there could be no question of believing in multiple religious systems. It was either Christ alone, or one could not be considered fully Christian. This was absolutely consistent with long-standing Jewish practice. You might say it's built into the very foundation of our faith. Even if you happen to believe that there are other divine powers out there, Paul insists that the God whom we know in Jesus Christ still has an absolute claim on our faith. And now may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do, this day and in all the days ahead.